amazing Rotary anniversaries, and I had to actually make sure I was reading this correctly. Ron Newton has been a Rotarian for 67 years. Can't imagine, 67 years. And Joe Valeriet, and I don't know if Joe's on, I haven't seen him just yet, but he has been a Rotarian for 53 years. So between that two people, that's 115 years of community world service through this amazing organization of Rotary. So congratulations to both of them. It's just so humbling to really see the depth that we have, because if you were to layer out the work that these two people alone have done in 115 years, it's so commendable. So I'm honored. A couple of announcements. The Centennial Committee, if you recall, did an incredible museum display. And that, because of COVID, has been extended to November 1st. So Ben McCarl and his team did so much work in the displays. So make sure you take your families and friends and tell your family and friends about it. And at that display tells about all the hard work that 100 years of Rotary has done in the city of Guelph. So please make sure you do that. And then the next thing I'd like to share is that this morning, the Fellowship Committee sent out a very important survey. So what we're working hard on is how can we connect together? What are you comfortable connecting with? We're meeting in Zoom, and this is going quite well, but is there an opportunity to perhaps meet in person down the road where we're all very careful with our COVID situation? Is there any fellowship activities that you would be interested in? And again, all very COVID friendly. And we want to make sure that we're staying connected. You keep hearing me talk that we have to stay connected. COVID is difficult just health-wise, but we have to make sure that we're taking care of each other mentally. And the key way that we as Rotarians and friends can do that is to stay connected and making sure that people are still being spoken to and having some fun here and there and having some laughs. So if you could please read the email that was sent by Noma Vales and fill out that survey. The Fellowship Committee is meeting on Monday, and they would like to have those results by Monday. So if you could do that over the weekend, we'd be very grateful. There is a section there that has other comments. And so when I did it this morning, I just made sure that I put in the comments what I was comfortable doing. So give as much information as you can, because we're really working hard to making sure that we're serving you the best way that we can during this crazy time. So Terry Jarvis, I'd like to welcome Terry. Are you there, Terry? And we're going to talk about exciting news from the Children and Youth Committee.
Yes, I'm wearing, you might have noticed, my Food for Kids badge. For those who are guests, I am a member of this club, and you never know what is going to happen when you come to a Rotary meeting just like this one. The speaker may present you with information that calls you to action, and that is exactly what happened with Food for Kids here about 3 years ago. The speaker told us how many children there were in Guelph going home to empty cupboards and fridges at the weekend and not having adequate food in their very food insecure homes. And so we as Rotary, all 4 clubs of Rotary, looked into it, and within 3 months we were running a pilot program, and now that is a charity that is still supported by Rotary. And my news is that the 4 Rotary clubs of Guelph, still working together, jointly made an application for a Rotary district grant and matching grant, and that has been approved. So the clubs are each going to put in $1,000, and we will get an extra $1,000 back from the district. So the Food for Kids, with currently what is our grocery gift card program, since we are unable to deliver food through the schools right now, will be the beneficiary of a Rotary district grant, and I'm very happy about that, and happy that all 4 Rotary clubs are still collaborating and working together on something as wonderful as this.
Outstanding, Terry. What I also love about that the most is that how the 4 clubs are working together. And the children in our community know that they have friends outside their community helping them. So congratulations. Yeah, so proud of you all. Thank you very much for sharing. I do want to share just a little tidbit and making sure there's so many facets of this company, that this club, that maybe not everybody understands. And I want to make sure that we are sharing this information to you. So our $100 we give for our birthdays, we give, and it goes to the Rotary International. And I want to make sure that we understand the critical part about when we're donating to Rotary International and where that's going. So Diane explained to us the grant that was approved for our Indigenous Committee last week. And it's roughly around $90,000 that it is going for food, for water projects in our own province in Georgian Bay area. And the reason that that grant became $90,000 was because of Rotary International and that foundation. So it's really important that we understand the power of the foundation and what that does for us and what it does for all of the committees and organizations that we support. So thank you for your $100 donations for your birthdays. And also, you know, perhaps just look and understand that if you're a donor elsewhere to another charity, what perhaps would Rotary International do? And is that something that you could do perhaps looking at a monthly basis? So just alone in your book that everybody has hopefully have, and there's about 4 or 5 of us that are selling the book. So if you have not gotten your book yet, please reach out to us and we'll make sure that you get a copy. But in there, it does talk about the critical, important work that is being done international. We know that Ab is so passionate about Cameroon, Anne-Marie and I with Lesotho, and we have Uganda and Louisa's sewing project in Uganda and India, and all of that is because of how we as a club are supporting the Rotary International Foundation. So I just wanted to kind of make that a little highlight. And so Mahmoud is going to introduce our speaker, but I just wanted to say that I took some time and listened, Devon, to your TED Talk, and it was incredible. I've shared it with several of my friends, and so we're so honored to have you join us today. Mahmoud, I'm going to allow you to come on board here and give our formal introduction to our wonderful speaker today. Are you there, my friend, Mahmoud? Oh.
He's on mute.
He's on
mute.
mute.
You're on mute, Mahmoud.
Houston, hello?
There you are.
Okay. So, President Tracy and fellow Rotarians and guests, I'm honored and delighted to introduce our esteemed and distinguished speaker today, Mr. Devon Clunis. I'm especially honored to introduce him as a fellow alumnus of the mighty University of Winnipeg. Winnipeg is a great city, in a great province, in a great country that welcomed me and Devon years ago and still does. In the center of the city, there is a pillar of education, of research, and character building, and the pursuit of social justice. Winnipeg and Manitoba has many firsts. The first Rotary Club in Canada that made Rotary International was in Winnipeg. The first women voting is in Winnipeg and in Manitoba. The Canadian Museum of Human Rights is in Winnipeg. And even the first chess grandmaster in Canada is from Winnipeg. And by the way, for Jim and Helmut, they have an excellent curling teams too. Another first is Chief Clunis, who is the first Black Chief of Police in Canada. To give you some background, the Winnipeg Police Service is about 1,500 officers and a $300 million budget. There is also other institutions such as the larger University of Manitoba, whose alumni are Dr. James Peebles, the Nobel laureate last year of physics. And of course, our own member of this club and member of parliament for Guelph, Mr. Lloyd Longfield. These are alumni of the University of Manitoba. So Mr. Clunis, we decided that introducing you and interviewing you are infused together. So the introduction will happen as the interview go forward. Absolutely. So Mr. Clunis, if you want to say a couple of words in the beginning, and we will start the interview.
Well, I simply want to thank you for this invitation, particularly at this time in our country's history, when we look at the incredible social unrest which is unfolding. I think it's critically important that we have these types of discussions. I truly would like to thank Chief Kobe for taking the time to be a part of this, the elected officials, and of course, my very dear colleague, Dr. Bob Christmas from Winnipeg. And so I look forward to engaging with all of you, and I think we will learn collectively from each other how we can go forward together in terms of improving the very social fabric of this nation. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you and welcome. So Devon, where were you born and when did you come to Canada?
Yes, you know, I love the name of the little place that I grew up in Jamaica. Now listen to this name and I think it'll warm your heart. It's called Harmony Vale. I was born in Kingston, but I was raised in Harmony Vale, just a little bit south of a place that many of you will know, Ocho Rios. And so I spent the first 11 years of my life actually being raised by my grandparents. I didn't start living with my mother until we moved to Canada at age 11. So just imagine that for a child. My grandparents were my world. They're who I knew, but I knew I had a mother who was in Canada working to support us. And at age 11, I was whisked away to go and live with my mother for a child.
So how was your upbringing in Winnipeg in the beginning?
You know, I remember we arrived September 15th, 1975, and my first impression at the time, back then you got off on the tarmac. My first impression as we stepped out of the airplane was, what is that? I was cold September 15th. I had never experienced cold before in my entire life. And my mother realized that that would be a little traumatic for us, so she actually had winter coats for us at that time. But also imagine I grew up, as I said, in rural Jamaica in a little community where everyone looked like me. So 2 days later, I am sitting in a classroom and I looked around, and for the first time, it really struck me, you're different. You stood out in the crowd, and there was no orientation like what we might do today for young people or immigrant families. You were just plucked into the north end of Winnipeg, into a school, and expected just to do well. And I didn't do well the first year. It was a huge challenge. And now I understand when I look back, I said, that would have been incredibly challenging for a child. Never mind the fact that you're leaving the country, you're leaving your grandparents, but now you're in this climate which is so different. And so I failed grade 6. That first year I failed. And I remember sitting with my mother and 2 teachers. And one teacher said, he's just not a smart little boy. Let's put him in a class for slow learners. This is 1976 now. But one teacher, the other teacher said, no, Devon, if you come to school, I had to repeat grade 6, but she said, if you come to school an hour early, I will be here and I will help you. Now, in today's context, I want to be very clear with you. Neither of those teachers look like me. They were Caucasian teachers, right? So that's a really important story, critical piece of this story. So the following year, I would get up every day and I would go to school an hour early to meet Miss Hannah, and she was faithfully there with me every day. And after about 3 months, she said these words that still ring in my ear to this point. She said, Devon, this is so easy for you. School became very easy. By grade 9, I was graduating top student. So it's important for us to remember this piece of the story in terms of the dialogue which is taking place right now. That was my early experience.
Thank you. How did you decide to become a police officer and in Winnipeg?
Well, to be honest with you, as I said, growing up in the North End, socially challenging neighborhood in our city, Most of the television that we saw at the time was coming from the US. I never sensed that somebody who looked like me could actually be a police officer or be a friend with a police officer. And it wasn't because I had any personal negative interactions with police, but everything I saw socially just said, no, people who look like you, Devon, black people in police.
Give your seat back once you're ready.
Never saw a black police officer in our city. You mentioned the University of Winnipeg. You know, I remember as a teenager, it was about 1979, watching the miniseries Roots. It was about the African slave trade. And I was in junior high at the time. And yes, I was experiencing racism, people calling you the N-word. But when I watched that miniseries, here's what I took out of it. I said, if my people can go through that and still be here today, I have a lot to be proud of. And so literally, I started walking around with my head up. And when somebody would try to insult me with a racial slur, I just felt that's just washing right off because I know who I am. And I determined as a teenager that one day I would like to do something to make a difference, to set an example for people who look like me and for the larger public. And so, you know, I thought I wanted to be a biologist. Now, the reason I wanted to be a biologist was in St. John's High School, I played basketball and my coach was my biology teacher. And I did very well in biology. So I thought I would go to University of Winnipeg to study biology. But when I arrived there, what I discovered, it wasn't so much that I loved biology. I loved my coach. And again, my coach did not look like me, very important part of the story. At the same time, I had a part-time job at the Bay downtown. And for the first time I was in security, I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with a police officer, another important part of the story. Communication, understanding who an individual is. And again, this officer looked nothing like me because, as I said, there were no police officers who looked like me in the city at the time. But the officer said, I told him how much I enjoyed that job. The officer said to me, why don't you consider becoming a police officer? And then it struck me, because I have respect for police, it's such a very public and visible job. If I became a police officer, other kids and people who look like me will realize you don't have to feed the stereotype. We can actually be in the front of the car, not in the back. And that's why I became a police officer. I had no idea how much they got paid. I just thought for me, it is a purpose about building that cultural bridge. And that's why I went into policing.
In your policing and in your public lectures, you mentioned that the power of using honorific terms such as sir and ma'am to citizens and youth and individuals. Tell us about that and you're advocating for that.
Oh, absolutely. It's transformative. So as I said, I went into policing because I really wanted to do some social good. And I saw police as this incredible vehicle. Now imagine what we deal with on a regular basis. I remember as I was on the bus on my way to university, I would often drive down Main Street and I would see people in these conditions that I never ever felt that I would actually have the opportunity to personally impact. But I remember after graduating from the police academy, I was right there on Main Street, walking the beat. And I would see people in these, what you would consider to be destitute conditions. And I would just try to treat them with a sense of dignity. So I would say, sir or ma'am, and literally, it's almost like you could see a light that would go on in somebody's eyes when you just treated them with that sense of dignity. And I remember at some point, officers were asking me, like, why are you doing that? Because I've never seen somebody treat somebody in that position in that manner. And I just knew that simply by treating somebody with that sense of dignity and respect, I can begin to start make a meaningful difference. And so that's how I went about my job, that I wasn't there to police the community. I was there to be a bridge builder, to help to build community, even if it's just touching one person at a time, giving them a sense of dignity and self-worth. And that's how I challenged myself to do my job throughout my entire career.
So thank you for the 30 years plus of policing and serving the community. You were advocate as a police chief, when you became a police chief, advocate of community policing. Tell us about community policing, and especially in not a homogeneous city like Winnipeg with different groups.
I really believe that community policing, if we go back to the very basic tenets of policing, It really is about the prevention of crime. It is about creating a healthy community. What was occurring in the city of Winnipeg throughout my entire career was that, you know, we were perennially murder capital, crime capital. And the mindset was that the way that we're going to correct that is with more police and more policing. And we kept trying that, and things just did not turn around. So my mindset was that we need to start looking at the root causes, right? If we really want our city to be safe, for me, the example of a safe city is not one with more police, it's actually one that requires fewer police. And in order to do that, you need to have a healthy community, a healthy populace. The challenge with the police service is that they were just always very responsive. So throughout my entire career, and particularly when I became the chief of police, I challenged our police service to say that we need to be community builders. We can't solve all the problems, but the incredible thing about police service is this: we're connected to almost every agency. So even though that might not be our responsibility, we know whose responsibility is, and we have the opportunity to connect someone to that right service. So for me, community policing is that I'm not here to police the community. I'm here to help to build a community. And when I took over as chief of police, I had 18 forums right across the entire city where I would ask the community, what do you want from the police service? Not a single individual ever said they wanted more policing, but they talked about things like, for example, parenting classes. They talked about the conditions of the neighborhoods in terms of getting it cleaned up and fixing up, you know, playgrounds, things along those lines. And I would actually have those service providers at those forums and say, okay, that may not be a police services responsibility, but here's a person who can actually fulfill that need in the community. So we became conduits. That for me truly is what community policing is all about. And when we do more of that type of work, I think we'll find that we'll have a lesser need for what we call law enforcement. Law enforcement is just a small part of what we do, but we serve this real critical role in the community. I think once we realize and adapt to that, we'll see incredible things happen in communities, in society as a whole.
So you focused, or you mentioned focusing on addressing the social issues of the root causes of crime.
Yes. Yes.
I know Winnipeg well, and especially some certain, and I'm sure many cities and towns have similar challenges. How is mental health related to this?
Mental health is a significant piece of this. And I think, again, this is where I say we as a society, as communities, we are failing those who we're supposed to be serving. Police organizations, yes, we have a specific role. We're trained to do certain things in a certain fashion. But when we see the number of mental health related calls that police are the first to be dispatched or responding to, I think we're doing a huge disservice to the individuals who are in need, families, communities, and also to the police officers who have to respond to that. I often use the analogy that if we know that somebody is having a heart attack, we will not be sending the police service as the first priority response. And then we have somebody who's having a mental crisis, and we're sending a police service or a police officer as the first response. That is not what we're fully equipped, prepared, and trained to do. And oftentimes the response is, well, we just need to train the police to be better at that. And I say no, because we recognize that that is not the best model for us to respond to this situation. We know certainly that in terms of mental health crises and challenges, these are simply escalating within community. And if our only response is that we need to do a better job in terms of preparing police to respond to that, I think we will continue to fail. We'll set the police up for failure. We'll set our communities up for failure. We'll keep seeing more of these tragedies occurring. What we need to do is look at the entire system and say that we need to collectively create a better response to that. And it's not about training police officers better. I can say this honestly because I do work both in Canada and in the US. You know, and we understand the global crisis that's occurring right now, but Canada has some of the best police training that you'll find anywhere. And when we see that the system is consistently failing us, I think we need to look at ourselves collectively and say, do we have the right mechanisms in place to ensure that we are successful collectively?
So we, through you and through this conversation, we want to honor and thank Miss Hannah. That.
Thank you. I'll share this part of my story with you because I think it's very meaningful. So
Please do.
you know, as I went on in my policing career, I got to the rank of what's called an inspector. There's only 20 inspectors in an entire organization like ours. And I remember thinking to myself, Devon, how did you get to this place? I'm now running a division, overseeing 200 plus people. And I thought, your life is so good. Little boy from Jamaica, you grew up with no electricity, no running water. You came here, and now you have this incredible position. I said, Miss Anna, I need to go back and find Miss Anna and thank her. And I literally went back to the school board office. I said, I'm looking for this teacher. I need to thank her for my life. And they told me that Miss Anna had passed away. And I thought how sad, but every time I would share my story, I would speak about Miss Anna and tell people, you as an individual, you can make this incredible difference, incredible impact on a life. And who knows what the ripple effect of that will be. Well, when I was in the competition to become chief of police, I was at home and I received a call from one of my officers who said, Devon, I don't know if this makes sense, but my neighbor works at the school board office and they remember you coming in looking for this teacher. She hasn't passed away, but she's in the hospital with a terminal illness. And literally, I put on my best suit and I went down to the hospital and I found Miss Hannah's room. And I knocked and I walked in. 36 years since I've seen Miss Anna. I said, Miss Anna, do you remember a little boy named Devon Clunis? And even now it makes me emotional as I tell you the story.
Of course.
Miss Anna said, yes. And she said, I am praying that you become the next chief of police. I'm like, Miss Anna, thank you that I can even apply for that position. Because if not for what you did all those years ago, I wouldn't be where I am. And I said, you probably did it for hundreds of other kids, but never heard thank you. So I want to thank you for every single one of those kids as well. And we just sat and we talked. And she passed away 3 weeks later, but you and I are having this conversation about Devon Clunis, first Black chief of police in Canadian history, because Miss Anna, who looked nothing like Devon Clunis, decided there's value in that young man. And, you know, and when I treated people the way I did on the streets of Winnipeg, I can't help but think about Miss Anna and what she did for me, which is part of why I continue to do what I do today.
Thank you. By the way, you are allowed to be emotional in camera. That's fine. So our theme today is towards a shared heritage.
Yes.
And a society where equity, diversity, and inclusion are our shared heritage. What do you mean by that?
You know, as I said at the onset, when I look at the social unrest, which is unfolding, I look at the dialogue, not just in terms of Black and white and police and community, when we look at the Indigenous experience in this country and we see how polarized we are at times. I often say to people, we need to realize that the only future is a shared future. And we need to be having meaningful dialogue. It can't be a case of, you know, the pendulum swings this way and that way, and everybody goes to their corner and we demand. It is a very difficult time. And as I said, you know, when the situation with George Floyd first erupted, I was contacted by literally every national and local media across this country. And as the former chief of police, you know, I was thinking, who am I to be speaking for the policing community? But at the same time, I recognize that if you have a voice, it's really critical that you use that voice, because I would hate to look back, you know, say a few years from now and say, Devon, you could have done something, but you didn't. And so my main message has been this: as difficult as the situation is right now, we collectively need to recognize that the only future truly collectively is a shared future. And yes, equity, diversity, and full inclusion has to be a part of that. But the only way for us to arrive at that place is to have meaningful dialogue and discussions. When I looked at what was unfolding in the US and with neighborhoods just being ravaged and torn apart, I said, truly, I don't want that to be the Canadian experience. And the only way for us to avoid that is to be having meaningful discussions and giving hope and showing that, yes, the times might be very difficult right now, but we have made progress. And this is an opportunity for us to actually springboard to something even better. But let's not tear down what we've built to this place.
Thank you. So you retired and you wrote a book, children's book. I think it's made for adults too.
It
the book's,
is.
yeah, and the book's name is Little Boy from Jamaica. What it's about?
You know, that was interesting because whenever I shared my story, people would say, you need to write it down. So I actually started writing an adult version of my story, and I shared it with my wife, and she said, Devon, this would be such a powerful children's story. So literally, we put the adult version aside and we wrote The Little Boy from Jamaica, Canadian history story. But as you said, adults read that book and they find their place in the story. And the most important piece, they say, I can make a difference. I can be that Miss Hannah. I can be the police officer who encouraged little boys. So everyone actually sees themselves in that story. So truly, it is my story from a little boy growing up to becoming the chief of police. But really, the main message that we wanted people to get out of this, when you look at the changing face of our country and how diverse it is that we need to invest in every single child. Everyone has that potential. And oftentimes, the only reason they fail to achieve that potential is that as individuals, we don't know that we can be that catalyst, the spark that will light the fire to take them to that place. So imagine, even when we talk about crime prevention and police work, I say this often. I said, if we ensure that every child had the opportunity to go to school and get a decent education, that, my friends, is the ultimate in crime prevention. That is the ultimate in terms of the social dysfunctions that we see occurring right across not only our country, but society as a whole. If for a period of time we would commit ourselves as a society to say, we will support every child that they get a decent education, it would eradicate most of the social ills that we're dealing with. We're talking about addictions and all these other issues. I think we're trying to tackle this from the wrong end. I say, even in terms of policing, number one calls for service in most police services are this: domestic violence. Well, we're trying to tackle domestic violence from a policing perspective. No, I say we need to be starting to teach, what does a healthy relationship look like? Let's start in elementary school, junior high, and high school. And over time, you would see those calls for service reduce like you would not imagine. We wouldn't have to be talking about defunded police. It would naturally take care of itself. So I really honestly believe that we're trying to resolve these issues from the wrong perspective right now.
So in 2017, you were awarded the Lieutenant Governor's Award of the Advancement of Interreligious Understanding by the Honorable Janice Philman.
Yes.
Tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. My mindset is this, we talk about diversity
Yes.
and inclusion.
Yeah.
Faith is a significant piece of that. You talk to most people, they believe in something. I'm not going to tell you what to believe, but we need to recognize that people have this inherent part of them that they believe. And so even as the chief of police, when I took over again in a city that was perennially a murder capital, crime capital, I was speaking to a Christian organization. And they said, Devon, what can we do? No. And it's also important to understand, in 1998, I became a police chaplain. I've been there for our people, serving those particular needs. So when I was asked in 2012 by a Christian organization, what can we do? And I said very innocently, well, why don't you pray for our community, which was at the time murder capital crime. Why don't you pray for it? And then do this. Back up your prayer with some actions. Be the answer to what you're praying for. Don't just say, I'm going to pray for you and walk away. You see somebody in need? Sure, you can meet that need. Well, that was such a controversial issue for a chief of police to be talking about prayer. I said, hey, I'm not telling somebody who tells me they don't believe in that to pray. I'm just saying this specific group. And I said, whatever you have as a skill or an ability to bring to the table to help this city that's so riddled with crime, I want you to bring it. And I will not exclude anyone. I want everyone to be a part of this. I even went and I spoke to the atheists and agnostics of Manitoba. Said, I want everyone to be at this table. So if we truly believe in diversity and inclusion, which is actually a protected human right in this country, constitutionally protected, why should we be afraid to say, this is who we are, everyone is at the table, what do you have? Bring it to the table. And I can tell you, the first year, crime dropped 13.9% in our city. Unprecedented. Because, I'm not saying not just because everybody was praying, it's because everybody recognized there's something that they can do and they came to the table. Throughout my entire tenure, crime just continued to drop, and I ensured that I included everyone as part of the solution. So when I was given that award, again, I was very surprised, but they recognized that as a chief of police, I was saying everyone has a role to play, and whatever you can do, you do that, and it is part of the collective. And again, when I talk about the future of our society, that's all of us moving together, moving forward, diversity and inclusion. And that's such an important part of who people are. Why would we say we want to exclude that from the discussion?
Thank you. There's this is the final question, and we are ending it now because there are lots of questions. I see them coming out. Now you have your own consulting firm, along with Dr. Bob Christmas, who's on the call here. And
Yes.
when I went through it, something that stood out for me, where you teach caring leadership matters. That's a
Oh,
beautiful, beautiful point.
Absolutely. Caring leadership does matter. I think oftentimes, especially in large organizations, people might focus on their policies and their procedures and you know what the end goal is that they're trying to achieve. But I often say to people, we need to remember this. Ultimately, what we're doing, it is about people. And people need to be cared for. It is no different than in policing. You know, that's why I treated people with that sense of dignity and respect. And even people that I had to arrest, I would treat with that sense of dignity and respect. And you could see the different outcome. I'm not saying it works every single time, but when we forget that care and leadership matters, you know, then we do things that drive good people away from organizations. We don't rise to be the best that we can be. Miss Anna realized that care and teaching mattered. She could have easily said, yeah, that little boy just doesn't have the capacity. Now remember, she gave up her own time, an hour every day for this little boy. That's caring. And I challenge all of us to say, no matter where we find ourselves, in community, in society, no matter what our title is at work, that if we treat people with that sense of dignity and respect and we care, I can tell you that in my time within the Winnipeg Police Service, as I was rising through the ranks, I was consistently being sent to areas or divisions where there were significant challenges. But I would go in and I would do this. My first responsibility, or the first thing I did, was not say, okay, what about the challenges? I created a healthy working environment for the people. And I made it fully clear that I'm here and your well-being is the priority number one for me. And then some incredible things would happen consistently. Consistently, all those great ideas, and I tell people this, even as a chief of police, all the great things they thought I implemented, no, I created the environment, and it was incredible what sprung up out of that when people actually realized they had a leader who cared. All those great ideas, and then you gave power to their ideas. And I tell you, Dr. Bob Christmas, who's on the call, when I became the chief of police and I started talking about crime prevention through social development, I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to effectively articulate it to my members and to the greater public. Bob Christmas was the one who articulated that message for me. And so I give credit where credit is due. It wasn't all those great ideas weren't Devon's, but I just created the right environment, a caring environment, and amazing things happen out of that.
Thank you. So I just want to put a plug here. Bob Christmas is a staff sergeant, still with the Winnipeg Police Service, who did his PhD, and his thesis at the University of Manitoba is about missing and murdered children or something of that nature.
Yeah, he's an incredible man. One of the brightest police officers. I'm going to embarrass him right now.
No, it's okay.
That I know anywhere on the planet. And this is why we continue to work together.
He will be a speaker here to our club in the next near future.
Yes.
So back to you, President Tracy. Thank you, Devon.
Yes.
Wow, I think that we're all completely riveted to this time together. And Devon, well, first of all, Mahmoud, thank you so much for bringing this wonderful speaker to us. And thank you, Devon, for your time and grace and kindness and just incredible leadership that you have given to the city of Winnipeg. But not just the city of Winnipeg, and now that you're consulting, it's going to continue to ripple, and it will ripple within our community. and just because of this talk. So thank you so much for your time. And we do have some questions here. Let me just bring them up. Okay, so I'll go to the first one here. So a question about carding. How has the practice of carding in Canada affected the BIPOC community?
I think it's affected it negatively. And, you know, oftentimes when I speak about these issues, I say again, we're trying to apply a very simple solution to a complex problem. I can tell you in the city of Winnipeg, I would say the Indigenous community to a large extent might be representative of the Black community in a place like Toronto. And oftentimes I will say this, I say, I don't really believe that it's fully just a system of ethnicity. I say, I take it back to the social issues that I talked about. You will often find that when we bring immigrants into the country, where do we place them? Just like with me, we place them as incredible, socially challenged neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods, I think whether they be Indigenous, primarily white or primarily Black, because of those deep social conditions which exist there, you'll find over-policing. It's just unfortunate in these particular situations. Yes, it's primarily Black people or Indigenous, and it's important for us to address it from those perspectives, but I think there's something that's even more foundational to that, and it's the socioeconomic challenges. You know, the report just came out in Ontario, and I was just reviewing that particular piece, and it spoke to some of these issues. But I think over time, because police are dealing with individuals in those situations, yes, police can develop those discriminatory practices. And initially, it may not necessarily be race-based, but because of the social economic challenges, and over time, officers now just kind of become biased in that way. And so I think we need to tackle this from those two different perspectives, because when we simply say to an officer or any individuals, you're just being racist, without looking at the fact that, you know what, maybe that is a tendency they develop because of their experiential work environment in terms of what they're dealing with. Because many officers will get into police service, as I told you, just wanting to do good. And because of the environment in which they're working time and time again, they develop that discriminatory practice. And now it disproportionately impacts the people in those neighborhoods. So we have to make officers fully aware of that experiential bias that they can develop, while at the same time dealing with the fact that we have created these socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods. I think we need to deal with it from both ends. Then we can arrive at a very healthy place.
What advice would you give to other chiefs in large cities in Canada, especially as related to the issue of systemic racism?
I think the largest piece of advice I can give is that we need to listen. As I said, you know, when I took over as the chief of police, I did not sit back with my executive and created all these grand plans. I went out and I listened to the community, but not only that, I went out and I listened to the membership. And out of that, we created a plan and we made sure that we were accountable. Consistently reporting back to the public and consistently reporting back to the members. I think for too long within the policing environment, we had felt that we're the experts, and yes, we are the experts in some things, but we can't be an island unto ourselves. If we're truly going to be a service, that means we're constantly receiving feedback. And when negative things occur, we can't respond from a point of just being defensive. You know, not every single police officer is like the Bob Christmases out there. There will be some who will definitely step out of bounds, and that needs to be dealt with in a very open and a very transparent fashion to bring back that sense of trust between us and the community. We're here to serve the community. I think the key thing we need to be doing is being consistently listening and staying connected to the community.
You know, I keep hearing woven in is all about communication, and I loved how you were listening with that security guard and had that conversation, and it just you took it into action. Mm-hmm. And Marva wants to hear a little bit more about your grandmother and what did that come from that she teach you that, or is that just instinctful, or you're a wonderful communicator?
See, I don't want to be emotional again. Stop that. You know, my mother and I often talk about that, and my grandmother is just in me. Like my grandfather was there and, you know, just quietly there, but it was my grandmother who was consistently in me, with me. And my mother often said, you know, my grandmother would go to the market and I would watch and I would wait. And just knowing what time she would be coming home. I remember coming home from school and consistently, who am I looking forward to seeing? And it was my grandmother. And you know, so yes, she is with me at all times. She was the sweetest, kindest individual you can imagine. As I said, I grew up with her, and I think when I was about 3 or so years old, my mother came to visit. And who did I run away from and ran to? I ran from my mother to my grandmother. She was everything to me, truly. So yes, you know, without realizing it now, when I reflect on her, yes, I would say a lot of my grandmother's still in me in terms of how I see and deal with the world.
What was her name?
Louise Henry. Louise Henry.
Louisa Henry.
Clarence Henry was my grandfather.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So you are an advocate of universal, are you an advocate of universal basic income as a tool to alleviate poverty that may lay in the root of all aspects of crime?
You know, that is a question. I do some work here. I was on the Poverty Reduction Council. I do some work with Winnipeg Harvest here, and it is a complex, again, I don't like to try to just attach, you know, one singular approach to very complex situations. Is that a part of it? Absolutely. But I think it's oftentimes we're looking for the silver bullet, which may not work in every situation. So I would say we need to look more dynamically. That is one of the tools. And so, yes, you can apply that, but let's not say that's going to resolve anything and everything. Just like I say, when they try to say in terms of policing, well, it's just more training, more training. There are many different avenues to address this crisis that we're dealing with, but that is one of the tools, yes.
Okay, we have another question here. What advice would you have for the law enforcement community on building bridges and trust with the Indigenous communities?
Well, again, that was one thing that we did here in the city. One of the first things I did was we had what's called the Indigenous Relations Unit. And when I became the chief of police, I assigned a very high-ranking police officer to that unit. I also realized that there was this incredible ebb and flow between people from the reserves to the city of Winnipeg. So our officers, even though we're not responsible for policing outside of the city, we actually reached out and we went to the reserves to have conversations. And I myself went to the reserves to meet with their chiefs and their people and just talk about how we can ensure that when they come to the city, that it's a safer environment, right? Once again, going back to the fact that we want to be a service. That's what we need to do. We need to ensure that people know that we're actually here for them. We care about their well-being. You know, it really is not that complicated. If you go all the way back to Devon Clunis, little boy, Miss Anna simply had that relationship, caring. Throughout my entire career, I made sure that I communicated and connected with people. I told you when I became the chief of police, I had community forums right across the city. People knew that I genuinely cared about them. And I think if there's any reason why we saw crime drop to such a significance, and if you go and you look in Maclean's magazine in 2016, after I retired, they wrote an article and they said it looked like a minor miracle occurred in our city. Now, during the entire time, I need to let you know, we never increased the complement in terms of the number of police officers in our city. Every year I gave money back to the city. So we didn't spend any more operationally. The only increases to my budget was what was negotiated contractually. But the one key thing that we did, and Bob Christmas will tell you this, is that there was this incredible connection with the community. Consistently hearing that feedback back and forth. I was out there. We were doing those practical things that we're talking about. We had one initiative in one of the most, again, what people would consider to be socially, economically challenged neighborhoods, where I called it Restore Our Core, where the police service took the lead, but we invited community members from outside the community to come in and actually help beautify the neighborhood. It was incredible what people saw there. So we built the relationship with citizens right across the board. That's what we need to be doing. That's how we can be the connectors and the conduits. Not about fighting crime, but building a crime-resistant or resilient community.
You gave them hope.
Yes.
and you showed that you cared,
Yes.
which is what we all want.
Mm-hmm.
So congratulations on that. I can't believe the statistics of dropping the crime rate at 13% in 1 year.
And that was in year one.
Amazing. Amazing. And it was because you got everybody on board, like you said, that everybody worked together. We have another question here. What was the challenges that you faced with the Black community and colleagues as the chief of police?
You know what? I did not face any challenges as a chief. I can tell you when I decided I was going to apply in 1987, I had some reservations because I thought, how is my community going to look at me? Are they going to feel like I'm a traitor? But I knew what I wanted to accomplish. As a chief of police, I must tell you this, people were incredibly proud. And I did not actually realize when I became the chief of police that I was the first in history. I received a call from one of my colleagues in Toronto, said, Devon, you realize you're the first? And it was like, oh my goodness, I have this huge responsibility now. And so people were actually quite supportive, but I felt good in arriving at a position when I realized the example now, I was actually living my dream. How many of us actually get to do that to that extent? And so I challenged myself that I was very proud for everyone to look like me and all the other minority groups. But I was also proud, you mentioned this, of what it said about the city of Winnipeg, right?
Yeah.
I'm very proud about that. To be the first to appoint someone like me as the chief of police. And I look back to where I was coming from. I've never seen a Black police officer, and now the chief is a Black police officer in this city. I thought it was saying something that we were building bridges and we're advancing. And so in today's context, when I see what's occurring, there's a part of me that's a little fearful. I don't want us to slide backwards. I want us to continue to move forward. That's why I'm saying what's occurring right now can actually be a springboard to the next evolution of what we want as a cohesive society.
Incredible. Marva has a great question, and I have this actually, I would like to ask her the same answer, the same question. She said, what is it about this little island in the Caribbean that produces excellence in so many areas? Politics, law enforcement, science, sports, and our Marva wisdom. So your thoughts on that?
Marva,
we're very grateful for that beautiful little island, by the way.
I am, I'll be honest, I wonder the same thing. I do not have the answer yet. We need further study on that because I really don't know, but I often ask when I see oftentimes people doing these things, oh, it's from Jamaica, it's from Jamaica, it's from Jamaica. Maybe it's our grandparents. I don't know. A lot of us are raised by our grandparents. It's true. I got to be honest about that. So I don't know what it is, but there is something special, no doubt.
Okay, we have another question here. You spoke about community policing. Where do you see them in our school system as a community resource officers as an effective tool in our community for improvement?
Wow, I love that question. I'll tell you why, because I know in some jurisdictions, they have gone away from school resource officers. After 9 years in policing, I had a bit of an epiphany. I realized that I could spend the rest of my career arresting people, and at the end of the day, I will retire and feel like I have not made a difference. So literally, I left regular general patrol policing. I became a school resource officer for 5 years. To this point in my life, I can tell you in terms of my policing career, they were the most enjoyable 5 years of my entire policing career. I have adults who come up to me consistently and remind me of the interactions we had when I was their school resource officer. So many tell me that it changed the course of their futures. I have police officers who became officers, as I said, you came and you spoke for a class. When I became chief of police, I received a letter from a mother here in Winnipeg who said, her daughter now resides in Germany, but heard about me becoming chief of police, and she had this message, I was her school resource officer. We talk about prevention. I think having police officers in schools, and imagine this, we have a lot of newcomers to our country who are coming from areas of the world where there's no sense of a relationship with police. What better time to build that sense of relationship? No different than when I was a young child. I had this fear, didn't really know where it was coming from, but I did not have that sense of that relationship with a police officer. So for me, I believe school resource officers are one of the most meaningful things that we can do to build that relationship going forward.
we have one more question here, and it's from our wonderful Terry Jarvis, and she wants to know why you were given a donut at your retirement ceremony.
I love that. Okay, here it is.
And then Marguerite says, how many donuts do you eat now that you're retired?
I love that question. So
And maybe
remember,
where
my
you get your donuts.
my life has been about not feeding the stereotype. Remember I said as a young person, like, no, I want people to know we can do something different. So the stereotype for police officers was they eat donuts. And if you ever watch The Simpsons, that's what it's about. So literally when I became a police officer, I said, I will not eat a donut again. And for 29 years, doesn't matter where I was, I could be in my home, in a closet, I would not eat a donut. When I had my meetings, I would tell people, bring muffins, no donuts to my meetings. So the last day in the office, I go into the boardroom, and at my place, there is a plate of donut. And they have it on tape. They said, Chief, you have to eat one. It's your last day. I'm like, nope. So finally I said, okay, if you all have one, then I'll have one. So that was my last day in the office. I had a donut just to be, a good guy with my officers. And I have not had a donut since.
That's a great story. We are so thankful for your time today. Roger, I'd like to welcome you to formally thank Devon.
Yes, Devon, it's a real privilege to say thank you. I had the privilege of living in Winnipeg for 4 years. We were transferred there in November of 1986. And the second week we were there, I think it was November the 4th, we had 5 feet of snowfall. I don't know if you remember that, shut the city down.
Yep.
And 2 days later, the battery acid in my car froze. So when I heard you needing a winter coat in September, it made me smile. Anyways, wonderful comments today. I was jotting down some themes, themes like, leadership, inclusiveness, being practical, being a good listener, being a difference maker, respecting dignity, mutual respect, and lastly, caring. And I think all of those in many ways are so symbolic of what we as Rotarians try to achieve in our community. So again, a special, special thank you. And as a small token of our appreciation, we're going to inoculate 100 children against polio in your name. Wow. Again, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Wow.
Thank you. We want you to know that we heard every word that you said, that I think it's going to change us, the way that we think about things, all of us. We look forward to hearing Bob's talk and him coming back and sharing words of wisdom with us. And on behalf of the Rotary Club of Guelph, thank you so much for your time today. Everybody make sure that they listen to the TED Talk, because it really is wonderful, and share it with our friends and family, so we can all take a little piece of you with us and make us better. So thank you very much, and thank you, Mahmoud.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
So everybody, that's it for our meeting.